This video describes the various mechanisms by which substances are moved into and out of cells. In particular, we'll aim to describe the processes of diffusion, osmosis and active transport, as well as explaining how these processes are used across biological systems. It's crucial for the everyday function of our cells that they're provided with a steady source of biologically significant molecules. That said, any exchange between our cells and their surroundings can occur through several different processes. Some of these processes require an external source of energy, while others occur passively. This means that they don't require any external energy. The most simple form of transport is diffusion. At GCSE, we define diffusion as the net movement of substances from an area where they're highly concentrated to an area where they're less highly concentrated. Diffusion is a passive process, meaning it takes place without the need for an external source of energy. Here, we can see that the red particles, which are initially packed tightly together, begin to spread out, diffusing into the areas where there are comparatively fewer red particles. Crucially, we note that diffusion is specific for each type of molecule. By this, we mean that the distribution of blue particles has no impact on the diffusion and spreading out of the red ones. This process is seen to continue until an even distribution is achieved. Now, in this first pause point, I'd like you to identify in which direction, that's to the left or to the right, diffusion of these particles will occur. Should take no longer than 10 seconds, but pause the video at this point if you need a bit more time. And we should be comfortable with the idea that diffusion is occurring from left to right, owing to the higher concentration of blue particles on the left side of our diagram. See if we can apply the same logic to this second example. Again, 10 seconds. And again, the higher concentration on the left means that diffusion will occur from left to right. Here, diffusion is occurring from right to left. That is to say, there is a net movement of blue particles towards the left side of our diagram, where their concentration is lower. In this final example, note that we are looking specifically at the movement of blue particles only. 10 seconds to make your choice. And so we see diffusion of our blue particles from right to left. Remember that our concentration gradient is dependent only on these blue particles, and as we have more on the right, we would see movement from right to left. Now, diffusion is seen across a range of biological contexts. For example, in the alveoli of the lungs, oxygen, which is found in high concentrations within the alveolus, diffuses into the blood. At the same time, carbon dioxide, which is being collected from the body's respiring tissues, diffuses out. We also see the diffusion of gases into and out of the leaf during photosynthesis, as well as in the absorption of food molecules in the small and large intestine. In this particular context, biologically significant molecules can be absorbed directly into the blood to be carried elsewhere in the body. There are three key factors which impact the rate at which diffusion takes place. These are temperature, surface area, and concentration gradient. As diffusion is a passive process, increasing the temperature of molecules will provide them with a greater amount of kinetic energy. As a result, they'll spread out more quickly, increasing our rate of diffusion at higher temperatures. Likewise, any increase in the surface area will act to increase the rate of diffusion. For this reason, we tend to see a high number of infoldings or projections on surfaces involved in exchange. Shown here, we can see the villi of the small intestine, the alveoli of the mammalian lungs, a set of fish's gills, and a root hair cell. Finally, Concentration gradient describes the relative quantities of our substance in two neighbouring regions. If there is a stark difference in concentration, we describe this as a steep concentration gradient. If, on the other hand, our two concentrations are largely the same, our gradient is described as being less steep or shallow. At GCSE, we need to feel confident with the idea that as concentration gradient increases, so too does our rate of diffusion. Now for this fifth pause point, we're just identifying those three factors that can increase the rate of diffusion, giving you 30 seconds to do that. Pause the video to make sure you have sufficient time to complete this task. And so we note that our rate of diffusion increases with increasing temperature, with increasing surface area, and when our concentration gradient is steeper. Our second mechanism of transport is osmosis. Osmosis describes a very specific example of diffusion, namely the movement of water molecules only. In order to understand this process, we first need to feel confident in describing the difference between a dilute solution, that is, one which contains very few dissolved molecules, and a concentrated one. We know that water is itself made up of water molecules. As such, we can think about how concentrated the solution is by looking at the ratio of water molecules to solute molecules. In these diagrams, red particles represent our solute and blue particles water. If there are lots of water molecules compared to solute molecules, we describe the solution as being dilute. If, on the other hand, there are far fewer water molecules compared with solute molecules, the solution is described as being concentrated. Osmosis then describes the movement of water molecules from a dilute solution to a more concentrated one. This process always occurs through a partially permeable membrane, that is, one which permits the movement of small water molecules but prevents larger solute molecules from passing through. In biological systems, osmosis plays an important role in maintaining the shape and structure of cells. In plant cells, the presence of a rigid cell wall allows the cell to become swollen and turgid when water moves in, and flaccid when it moves out. If a plant is not watered regularly, it will begin to droop. This stems in large part from the fact that many of its cells will become flaccid and lose their robust, regular shape. By comparison, the lack of a cell wall in animal cells means these structures risk bursting if too much water passes in, or shriveling if too much passes out. In both instances, this osmotic damage can have a significant impact on the health and function of the cell. The final mechanism by which substances enter and leave the cell is active transport. Active transport describes the movement of substances from a low concentration to a high concentration. In other words, it occurs in the opposite direction to diffusion. Because this process involves the movement of substances against a concentration gradient, it requires energy from respiration in order to power it. One example of active transport occurs in the root hair cells of plants. We know already that these specialized cells are able to absorb water from the soil passively, owing to the steep concentration gradient going from the soil into the cell itself. However, in order to be successful, our plant must also absorb mineral ions from its surrounding soil. These molecules are found in far lower concentrations and as a result must often be moved against a concentration gradient in order for them to enter the root hair cell. In order to achieve this, the plant must expend energy from respiration. This energy is used to drive special protein carriers located in the membrane, which move specific ions from the soil into the plant. While wherever possible we want to minimize the use of active processes, the fact that our plant cannot survive without these minerals mean it can be seen as a worthwhile investment. Active transport is also seen in the small intestine. Here, energy is expended in order to ensure that the maximum possible quantity of food molecules can be absorbed into the blood. If active transport did not occur in these tissues, we'd only be able to extract about half of the useful molecules from any food which we eat. Let's look then how we would apply this knowledge to a range of exam-style questions. In this first instance, we're asked to identify and describe the type of transport used by alveoli to absorb carbon dioxide from the blood. In terms of a model answer, I'd make sure to include the following key ideas. In other words, I'm identifying diffusion as the mechanism by which this transport is taking place. More specifically, our molecules of carbon dioxide are diffusing from an area of high concentration in the blood to an area of low concentration in the alveolus. I demonstrate my knowledge of diffusion by defining it as a passive process, that is, one which occurs without the need for an external source of energy. Starting to dial back the support, we have a writing scaffold for this next question. Here, we're being asked to identify and describe the type of transport used by root hair cells to absorb water from the soil. Can I ask you to independently copy and complete this writing scaffold? It should take around 2 to 3 minutes, but feel free to pause the video to give yourself time to finish. My model answer is as follows. So identify the process as osmosis. More specifically, this is occurring from our dilute solution in the soil to a more concentrated one in the root hair cells. I further demonstrated my understanding of the process by making it clear that osmosis is occurring across a partially permeable membrane, and like diffusion, is a passive process that occurs without the need for an external source of energy. In this third example, I'm going to ask you to complete your answer without a writing scaffold. Here, we're identifying and describing the type of transport used this time to absorb mineral ions from the soil. Again, 3 minutes to complete this answer. Pressing pause on this video in order to give yourself time to finish. And hopefully our answer looks something like this. Here we've identified active transport as the process by which mineral ions are absorbed. We know that this is the case because we have movement from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. In other words, our movement of ions takes place against a concentration gradient. In order to ensure that we access all marks, we want to refer to active transport as an active process, that is, it requires energy from respiration, and that this energy is used to drive the action of special protein carriers located in the membrane. In this video then, we've described those 3 mechanisms by which substances are moved into and out of cells, and applied them to a range of biological contexts.